Welcome to the Creative Penn podcast. I'm Joanna Penn, thriller author and creative entrepreneur, bringing you interviews, inspiration, and information on writing, publishing options, and marketing ideas for your book. You can find the episode show notes, your free author blueprint, and lots more information at thecreativepenn.com. And that's Penn with a double N. And here's the show. Hello creatives, I'm Joanna Penn and this is episode number 454 of the podcast, and it's Friday 11th of October 2019 as I record this. So today I'm talking to Grant Faulkner about writing a novel in a month. Now Grant is the Executive Director of NaNoWriMo, National Novel Writing Month, which is November, and he's also a writer. And we talk about why stories matter, especially in times that feel quite dark sometimes, let's face it, and how to get started writing fiction if you have only ever written nonfiction. And remember, we all have to start somewhere. How to find the time to write and make the most of that time, accountability, and how to manage your life during NaNoWriMo. And yes, I publicly commit to doing NaNoWriMo for my third Matt Walker book. I have done it twice before. 2009 for Stone of Fire and 2012 for Desecration. Both times I managed around 20,000 words, but a good start. And because I'm a discovery writer and I think and I research as I write, that may be where I end up, but I need to focus some time. And this year, obviously, I have dictation, so it'll be interesting to see if I actually make the 50,000. But regardless, it's good to put aside time for writing. So maybe you'll be joining us for NaNoWriMo, maybe you won't. Even if you are not going to, this is still an interesting podcast if you want to write a novel. And in fact, if you want to write if you want to have a laugh, check out the videos I did during my first NaNoWriMo, which is at thecreativepenn.com/first novel. I did videos every day that year, and it was the first sort of time I'd ever written fiction. I was learning so much. It's also very cringy looking back because I don't have the confidence that I have now. You can tell I'm a little bit scared of the audience. I'm scared of the camera. I didn't know what I was doing. I was living in Australia at the time and, it really was. It was 10 years ago. And there's some very bad lighting. My face, I don't know whether the makeup I was wearing was so bad. I mean, it's possible because I'm not very good at makeup. But anyway, those videos are quite funny. thecreativepenn.com/first novel. And even though I do cringe about those early videos, I also appreciate them because I know how far I've come. And that is a good reason to document things in blogs and podcasts and stuff, because you really realise how far you've come. And even though there's the rest of our life to learn all this stuff, it's good to reflect on that. So straight into my personal update this week, I have been doing lots of publishing tasks and some very detailed backwards and forwards and little formatting and very difficult actually. 2 books in German, almost ready. So The Successful Author Mindset and Successful Self-Publishing, both coming out in German in the next few weeks. The ebooks are done. The print books are almost there. The proof copies have gone to my brilliant German consultant, publishing assistant / editor, Anya. And it's very frustrating because obviously when you don't speak a language, and when I format my books in Vellum, usually I can obviously see whether there's a spacing issue or a little typo you might have missed, or this should be a subhead, or, how things should be. But when you don't understand the language, you just can't see it. So it's been great having Anya to help me with all this. I've also worked with a whole load of beta readers who I will thank when I do the special episode on German stuff once I've got the books out, had a bit of a go at marketing, etc. So I have definitely had a few frustrations this week. I don't like being out of control. And it's so funny because you think you go indie for control, but I actually found myself out of control because I don't understand the language. So if you've been listening to the show for years, you will know that this is my second foray into the German market as an indie. I was early, as ever. In 2014, I put a novel into the German market and just gave up in the end as there was no real way to market it. And I also licensed a book to a German publisher, again, another novel. That didn't work, didn't sell much. So I pulled out of the German market, bought out my translators, and now things have changed. So I'm trying again. So one of the things that changed is, as I reported earlier this year, my sales in Germany in English have gone up a lot in the last year, which implies there's much more of a digital purchasing change in behavior, but also I'm using DeepL, the translation engine, so I can get a first draft done very, very cheaply. It's absolutely incredible. It's about €2 basically to translate a whole book, and it takes about a minute. Then, of course, you need the editing, you need the cover design, you need all the things you normally do, but it's still a lot cheaper. And as announced last week, and I'm sure you've heard by now, Amazon have now announced ads in the German store as well as the UK store. And of course, they've been available in the US for a while now. So my intention when I publish, which will be beginning first couple of weeks of November is the plan, is to go in KU and to use Amazon ads because, let's face it, there are ways to publish wide in Germany. The Tolino is the sort of the other e-reader, but I don't have any way to market effectively on other devices. Whereas KU plus Amazon ads is, if in a language that is not your own, seems to be more of an effective way to market. But my plan is to do that, get some reviews on the books, and then look at going wide in 2020 with Tolino. And I will get lots of ideas from the Frankfurt Book Fair, which I'm off to this week. And I'll be talking to a lot of indies there. And I will be putting all of this together in a podcast episode on publishing in translation, again, using obviously AI. Well, it will be AI first draft and also AI advertising because, the Amazon ads, you can use auto-targeting. So very interesting times. Also, I've been recording Productivity for Authors as an audiobook that will be out in December. It is on pre-order at the moment. And of course, you can get the ebook in the special NaNoWriMo bundle, storybundle.com/nano, NaNo. I also finished, I have been writing a lot, but it's funny. I've been writing things that won't necessarily turn into books. So this Books and Travel episode about Australia. So Books and Travel, my other podcast, which has interviews, but also travel memoir episodes that I do myself about my travels. And this has been a very challenging piece of writing. It ended up only being about 3,000 words, but I wrote a lot more. I dictated a lot. I edited a lot because it was very difficult to figure out what to say about Australia. For a start, it's a really big country, and the post or the article, which is a podcast I perform, it has turned out more about my feelings about the place and what I learned and how things changed for me because of Australia. And I have positive things to say, and I also have some negative things to say. And it's really difficult because I'm very used to doing this kind of thing, this sort of helpful, nonfiction, useful tips, upbeat, and then fiction, which is I'm making it up, but you don't know whether it's real or not. And then memoir, so this kind of travel memoir, very much I'm standing behind what I'm saying, and it's difficult. So if you're interested in that Australia episode, that is on Books and Travel this week, 17th of October, 2019. I also did a podcast episode with Orna Ross this week on branding and intellectual property licensing and our challenging thoughts on after the IP licensing fair. And you can find that on the Ask Ally podcast or just search on your podcast app for Orna Ross, O-R-N-A, Ross, R-O-S-S. That is probably the easiest way to bring that up. And it's the Advanced Salon. Links in the show notes as ever. So I have, this week, it has felt quite bitty. I've been doing all these things, preparing to basically take the rest of October away, Frankfurt for the book fair, and then back briefly, and then Vegas for the business masterclass. And both of these events I know will be very intense for me. So I'm starting to up my vitamins to keep my immune system going. With particularly the travel can be difficult. But this, I expect to learn a lot in the next few weeks, and as ever, I'll be sharing that with you. And both of these things are about rights. So Frankfurt and also Vegas, we're talking about IP licensing. And Orna and I were talking about this, really reflecting on the fact that there is a journey of being an indie author. When you start out, you're just trying to get a book out there. Maybe you just want to get an ebook on Amazon. Maybe you just want a print book to hold in your hand. And then you start realizing you have to do some marketing, so that takes you down a certain route. Then you're writing more books, and then you realize that there's a bigger world out there. Maybe you start to go wide. Maybe you try other formats. Maybe you might do a hardback. You might get into audiobooks. Then you start looking at foreign rights, maybe licensing, maybe translation. You start looking at how do you market globally to other countries. And then you start thinking much bigger about IP rights and about protecting your IP into the future, and really thinking about estate management and stuff like that. So I want that is the indie journey encapsulated. But if this is a career for you, if you're an author and this is your career, then that is a progression. That is a sort of career path. And there's lots to learn at each of those stages. And, you'll keep creating, but after creating, you're turning these things into intellectual property assets that you can exploit in different ways. And the more you learn about exploiting your intellectual property rights, the more money you're going to make. Really, seriously, that's what it comes down to. And yes, it takes time to learn this stuff. I'm still learning this stuff. Why I'm going to Vegas is because Dean Wesley Smith and Christine Catherine Rush, who are kind of my mentors in this space, they are still learning this stuff, and they've been in publishing for like 30, 40 years. So yeah, I'm looking forward to telling you more about that. Also, I wanted to recommend the Netflix documentary American Factory, which is about a factory in Iowa, I think, which basically got got left by GM, and all these people got laid off, and then a Chinese company bought it and started retooling to make glass for windscreens. And it's an excellent documentary. It's very, very good, not just about the cultural differences between the US and China, but there's also a twist at the end that makes it clear what the future might look like. And I'm not going to tell you, but it's really thought-provoking. It's a very good documentary. And whatever your political affiliation, they did a very good job of this documentary because it's about the humans involved. I don't think it's political at all, in that you can have sympathies whatever side you're on, and also whatever you think about the US or China, you feel sympathy for the people, and it's very good. Anyway, so that's American Factory on Netflix. So thanks as ever for your emails and tweets and comments on the show, which of course you can always find at thecreativepenn.com/podcast, or tweet me at thecreativepenn. You can, also, I'm reading some out. That's what I'm doing. Tori Element says, an excellent episode today with Jules Horn. Thanks so much to both of you on our audio episode. Kevin McGill says, love all of your talks on Audio First. It's led me to revisit my middle grade audiobook, which is dramatized with a musical score and sound effects and released through Apple's podcast. Thinking of doing a re-release, what are your thoughts on dramatized audiobooks? And this is a great question that Kevin has brought up here. And I guess Jules and I hinted a little bit towards the end of our episode last week, but there are so many possibilities for creating in an audio first environment. So what Kevin's talking here, has a middle grade book. So let's think about the words of a middle grade book. There are some words, but many kids' books, I guess this is, as you say, middle grade, but many books will have more images in for younger ages. And then with audio, how can you dramatize that even further? How can you make the learning environment even better? And it's not just for kids, it's for everyone. I love some of these full cast drama audiobooks. I think they're brilliant. there's a spectrum. And again, I feel like where we are as indies is a bit like where we were with ebooks and print on demand, which is it's very easy to do a straight read audiobook at this point. You can do it. It's not that big a challenge, really. And yes, I have a book coming on that in 2020. But to do a dramatized audiobook with music, with multiple voices, that is a big deal. That is a really big deal right now. And I think this will change, as I've talked about with voice synth. But getting different actors to do things, it can be very expensive. Doing music, you need a lot more technical skill to do that. So my thoughts on dramatized audiobooks are brilliant. They're amazing. But not something I will be doing. But if you have the skills or you can outsource the skills, then go for it. And then, I just wanted to give a shout out to Graham Downs, who said, I never thought I'd enjoy a series as much as I'm enjoying the Arcane books by the Creative Penn. And it currently is on book 6, Gates of Hell. And I found this an amusing treat. Thank you, Graham, because it kind of implies that he didn't think he was going to enjoy my books and then have discovered that he really does. So I appreciate that. Good. Right, today's show is sponsored by my own course on how to write a novel. And I do have a course on how to write a novel because it's one of those things that I get asked all the time. So is it your dream to write a novel, but you just don't know where to start? Have you started writing only to run out of ideas? Are you suffering from self-doubt about whether you're good enough to write a novel? Do you feel overwhelmed by all the information and craft books and extensive courses out there? If you've answered yes to any of these questions, this course is for you. I have taken the approach of the iceberg. You only need to know the bit at the top. You need to know a few specific things to write a novel. And yes, you can learn craft for the rest of your life. The rest of that iceberg, the 90% underwater, you can delve into those depths later on. But you have to get that first book done. Sometimes you can drown yourself really in trying to learn too much. So the focus of the course and the private Facebook group is to get you to a finished draft and into editing. One happy course member, Jim, says, the information is outstanding, laid out in the perfect order. It is a roadmap that takes you from self-doubt and confusion to typing the end. More than anything else, it gave me the knowledge and confidence to not only start my novel, but also finish it and then do it again. I'm about to start my 3rd book that is now outlined and ready to go. All of this happened after I purchased and studied your course. Thank you, Jim. And if you'd like to finally write your novel, check out thecreativepenn.com/learn, LEARN, and that will take you to my courses. So this type of, sponsorship, this kind of shout out for money, pays for the hosting, transcription and editing. But my time in creating the show is sponsored by my patrons. Thanks to everyone supporting the show on Patreon. Thanks to all of you who've been supporting for months and years. I love you all. And thanks to new patrons, Robert Waugh, J.M. Hart, Lara Coates, Vanessa Blair Siebert and Celine Bruant. I really do appreciate your support on Patreon, like the tweets and emails. It demonstrates you enjoy the show and want it to continue. And of course, if you support the show, you get extra audio. You get Q&A audio every month, which I will be recording soon in the next week for October. And I talk about, I'm pretty personal in those shows, actually, because they are behind the scenes, behind a small paywall. And if you support the show for just a couple of dollars a month or less than a coffee a month, you can get access to the entire backlist. Support the show at patreon.com, patreon.com/The Creative Penn. Right, let's get into the interview with Grant. Grant Faulkner is the Executive Director of NaNoWriMo, National Novel Writing Month. He's also a short story writer, novelist, and author of nonfiction, including Pep Talks for Writers, 52 Insights and Actions to Boost Your Creative Mojo. Welcome back to the show, Grant.
Hey, Joanna. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's great to have you back. So you've been on the show before, so we're just going to dive straight into it.
Right.
And we're talking, this is going to go out for NaNoWriMo, which is November every year. Now, one of the things that keeps coming up in conversations with people is, writing fiction is an indulgence. We're living in difficult times, whatever your politics, things are a bit crazy, climate change, rise of AI and all this stuff. And people feel like maybe they should be doing something more important in inverted commas. So let's start, why is story more important than ever?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think even in times that maybe aren't so dark or don't feel so dark, I think every fiction writer asks this question from time to time. Because stories are sometimes seen as trivial entertainment. I think you use the word indulge. And we can easily forget, my thing is why it's important is that we are meaning making creatures, and the way we make meaning in the world is through our stories. And we understand who we are through our stories. We understand who others are through our stories. We understand the world through our stories. And we understand what the world can be through our stories. And, it's been interesting to me how important novels and how, they're even more important now than they've ever been. After the 2016 election here in the U.S., George Orwell's 1984, which was published way back in 1949, was on bestseller lists for I don't know how long. It might still be on bestseller lists. And Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451 became newly relevant. Think about how all the attention that Margaret Atwell's The Handmaid's Tale is getting, and her new book, The Testaments. So people, they look for ways to understand the world and themselves in the world through stories. And beyond that, I think stories give us solace, whether it's a story that's so relevant as The Handmaid's Tale, or if it's something that is just for entertainment. Entertainment's also really valuable. So, yeah, I always argue that stories are important, and I hate to hear people say they're not important or they're less important.
Yeah, and just a correction there, Margaret Atwood. For anyone listening, I can hear all my listeners going, "It's Margaret Atwood."
Oh my gosh, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
No, that's fine. I'm sure if she's listening, she won't mind. But I also
it's early in the morning here.
Yeah, no worries.
I'm just having my coffee.
So I think that as consumers of story, we're in this. Everyone talks about this golden age, and I mean, certainly we're binging a box set at the moment, Designated Survivor, which is a sort of US sort of political show. And it's really good. And I like getting back into the story. But as writers, it's also about empathy, isn't it? About putting yourself in someone else's shoes can actually help us understand each other. And, instead of ranting or getting upset, sometimes putting our deepest feelings into story can actually help us sort of figure things out almost.
Yeah, and that's what I mean. Like when I say we understand who others are through our stories, stories are really the best way to see the world through other people's eyes. And right now, more than ever, I think that's what we need in the world, is to be able to understand other people. We don't have to agree with them, but it's great to see how they see the world, and to either put our own opinions or our own sights sort of in question, to have a counterpoint to it, and also just to create a dialogue. I think the reason that people think of the world as dark currently, it's largely because of the divisiveness of it, and the impossibility of having a conversation or any type of dialogue. And that's really what we need to have, is a dialogue. And I think stories open up the door to that dialogue. And no matter what your politics are, a good story is going to resonate with you, and a good story is going to create a conversation, I think.
Oh, yeah. And we can all bond around Stranger Things.
Yeah, even if exactly. It doesn't matter who you are. Stranger Things is going to be good.
Oh, absolutely. Okay, so I want to sort of wind it back to the idea of creativity as well, because many authors, I mean, certainly I did NaNoWriMo back in 2009, really helped kickstart my fiction writing. And a lot of writers start with nonfiction and they feel like they're not creative, and ideas for stories might be difficult to find, or they might even be suppressed. I feel personally that I felt I was not creative. I could never write fiction because, I'd been an IT consultant. I didn't have anything creative in me, but it was more that it was suppressed over years of work. So for somebody listening who feels like they are just not creative, how would you recommend they get started with fiction?
Yeah, I hear this so often when I talk to people about NaNoWriMo. I hear one of two things when I invite them to do it. One is I don't have the time, and two is I'm not a creative type or I'm not a writer. And I think what they're doing when they say that they're not a creative type is they're putting an unnecessary limit or obstacle in front of themselves, because I believe that everyone is a creative type. You're a creative type by virtue of being human. That's what really defines us. And one part of being a creative type is being a storyteller. And again, it's what I was saying earlier, is that we make meaning of the world through stories, and we answer the question, what if, through our stories. So I view, in NaNoWriMo, our mantra is that everyone has a story to tell and that everyone's story matters. And so I think you create yourself as a creative type by writing your story, by engaging with words. You are a writer because you write, not because you're published. And so, yeah, I like to counter that notion that when people say I'm not a creative type, I think they need to tell themselves that they are a creative type and then experience creativity, to the hilt and prove it to themselves.
I actually think that, my block personally came from feeling like the only type of story I should write, again, should in inverted commas, would be some kind of award-winning literary fiction. And in fact, the books you mentioned before are all award-winning literary fiction. And I was really released from the block by feeling like, do you know what? I like reading thrillers like Dan Brown. So I'm going to write a thriller like Dan Brown. So what's your feeling around this? We should write a certain thing.
Well, I think we should only write what we're passionate about and what interests you. And, these books are also, they all border the lines of dystopian fantasy and sci-fi. And there are plenty of genre novels that inform our worlds in very deep ways and also entertain us and provide solace and all those good things about writing and reading. So, yeah, I think as writers, it's easy to fall into that trap of the should. Like I should be writing something commercial is another thing that people tell themselves. Or I should be writing something entirely original, or I should be writing something literary. And really, those shoulds, I think, tend to probably shut you down somewhat, shut down your creativity, kind of narrow your view. And I think the best stories to pursue are the stories that are calling us, that really mean something to us, the things that we wake up to and we're really excited to go write them. Or even if we're not excited, even if it's kind of painful and causes a lot of anguish, you still find meaning in it. You can't imagine your life without, being able to write that story. And so I generally don't like the word should. In that context, I think we all have different styles of expression, and I think every genre in the world has produced great books and meaningful books. So, the only should you have, you should write the story you want to.
I agree. Now, you also mentioned that when you talk to people, they will often say they don't have the time. So,
Yeah.
What do you answer to that?
Yeah, I think there are occasions when some people just do not have the time. If you're a single mom working 2 jobs, it's hard to squeeze in writing. But at the same time, I think most of us, we can create the time if we really think about how we use time in our lives. And so I always think of the story of Toni Morrison, who actually was a single mom with 2 kids, working in New York City for a publishing house. And the way she wrote her first novel, after doing everything she had to do in the day, she had about 15 minutes left before going to bed. And that was not like the prime moment for her creativity to sing. But she sat down and she wrote for 15 minutes a day before going to bed. And that's how she created her first novel. It was in 15-minute increments, doing something, small things like that every day. They build up to big things eventually. And so I think most of us can find those 15-minute nooks and crannies in our day to write, whether it's at our lunch break or the first thing when we wake up or at night. And that's the advice I give people for NaNoWriMo. I think it's really crucial. I mean, NaNoWriMo is one part a sort of time management exploration. And I think we talk about all the kind of craft things that go into a good story, like how to write good dialogue or how to plot a novel. But one of the most important things to be a successful novelist is time management. It doesn't get the glory, but it's really true. And finding the time in your life to write. And so to write, essentially 1,700 words a day during National Novel Writing Month, you really have to excavate your life. And I do it every year because my life changes. And I do what I call a time hunt. And we advise that our participants do this as well. And it's simply keeping track of how you use time for, say, a week. And really analyze in 15-minute increments or half-hour increments, like how you spend time. How much on social media? You can actually get software that does this too, that helps. But how much time do you spend on social media? How much time do you spend binge watching Netflix? How much time do you spend, cooking dinner even? And think about like where you can give things up. Where can you open up time? And I think most people can open up an hour or two a day in their lives. And by doing that, you're inviting in something that matters a lot to you, which is writing. And I think I just see too many people say, I'm going to write that novel someday. And there are ways to make that happen today.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I guess, we should probably just circle back and say, well, for people who don't know NaNoWriMo,
yeah, I know.
You've told us a few things there, but just explain the concept and how it works and how people get involved.
Yeah, I have this fault at this point that I assume everyone in the world knows what NaNoWriMo is. And so sometimes I just start talking about it without explaining it. NaNoWriMo is actually many things. At its most basic, definition, it's a challenge to write 50,000 words of a novel in 30 days during November. And we're a nonprofit, and you can come to our website and sign up, and you can just write 50,000 words on your own, or you can join into the NaNoWriMo community, which is a really vibrant, wonderful, encouraging community. And you can do that online through our forums. There are 2 million forums posts every year about every topic under the sun. Or you can join in our local regions. We have 1,000 volunteers around the world, and they organize these wonderful writing events, which are, they're one part accountability kind of structures to make sure that you're still writing, and then they're largely about encouraging and providing like games and activities to keep writing. So they're full of like things like word sprints and word wars, and so it's a way I think writers as like solitary writers is overrated. I think too many people think that writers are always solitary. Writers writing in a community is a wonderful way to enhance your creativity and collaborate as well. So, and then we're in 1,200 libraries around the world as well. And we have a young writers program where 100,000 kids and teens sign up to write novels, and we support 10,000 classrooms with free novel writing resources.
Yeah, I think it's brilliant. And it's so funny because I did it that year in 2009. I think I did it again in 2012. I just went to my account again today. And both times I only did around 20,000 words. But exactly, only. And people listening, when you say 50,000, it's so interesting in the indie community, because when you started NaNoWriMo, like when it started, how many years ago was that?
So this is our 20th anniversary, and I didn't start it. Chris Beatty is the founder, and he started it in 1999 with 20 of his friends. It started out as a writing community.
Right. And for many people, 50,000 words is a lot, but in the indie community now, there are people who are writing a lot more than that. Like people, so isn't there someone who does that in a day, like the first day?
There is. Every year I will hear stories of someone who does it in a day. And I honestly cannot imagine how that's possible. I know that I could not do it.
No, exactly.
And so I think there are people who just love indulging in the sort of extremities of writing just for the sake of experiencing that.
Yeah.
And I'll also hear of people who set their goal way beyond 50,000 words. Like I'll talk to people who write 200,000 words in a month. So,
yes. And the other way, what I was going to say is I don't feel like I failed NaNoWriMo by doing 20,000 words. What it did is I set aside that time. And it's funny because this year, so we're recording this in 2019, I think I'm going to do NaNoWriMo again.
Yay.
Because the timing is right for the third book in my Matt Walker series. And I'm like, you know what? If I could get a first draft, a lot down, that would be great. So I guess I'm committing to it as we talk.
Good. We're going to hold you accountable. NaNoWriMo, we're going to put you on Twitter and call you out and make sure.
Well, this is the thing. I was like, am I going to tell Grant? Yeah, okay, I'm going to do it. Because I think you mentioned accountability, you mentioned the encouragement. I have a lot of author friends now. I don't need NaNoWriMo for these things, but it's the energy involved drives you through. And you can get on Twitter and there's the hashtag, you can go on the communities, you can go to, if you go to a local cafe, there's probably going to be people in there.
It's true. And I want to say two things. Well, one, on that note, yeah, there is something about feeling that the whole world is writing with you that is very galvanizing on those mornings that you might feel like giving up, and yeah, if you open up Twitter and you see this whole stream of people reporting their word count or encouraging other people, when I see those stories about people coming, because sometimes people will write 20,000 words in the last week or the last few days because they're so dedicated to hitting 50K. And I find that really inspiring. And so that's a crucial part of the community, is being inspired by others. And then also, since you said you wrote only 20,000 words, we hear this a lot. I can't tell you how many times I've had people apologize to me for not hitting 50,000 words. And they've said, I only wrote 10,000 words. And I just want to applaud that as a huge success. I mean, going back to the Toni Morrison story about building things through small increments, if you write 10,000 words a month, that's 120,000 words a year. That's 2 good novel drafts. That's something to celebrate. If you wrote 20,000 words like you did, that's 240,000 words a year. So what is that? At least 4 novels. Yeah. So that's a tremendous amount of writing, and you should never apologize for that. So you showed up and you wrote, and so that's great.
Yes. So let's assume then some people listening are like, okay, we're gonna do it. What are some of your tips for achieving that? I mean, you've mentioned the time hunt idea, which I totally agree with. And I'm already blocking out chunks of my calendar for writing. So in Google Calendar, I just block out time for it in November. And it's just like, okay, well, I just have to maybe cancel a few other things or say no to things to make that time. But what are some other ideas from those who have hit the 50K in a month?
Yeah, I think it's a rare person who can just show up without any sort of time planning and just trust that the world's going to support them in writing a novel. So yeah, starting with some good time management so that you're structuring things, as you mentioned, on your calendar. We have an active conversation or debate every year about whether it's best to plot or whether it's best to just show up and wing it, which is like, we call it pantsing, or something in the middle like plantsing. One part pantsing, one part plotting or planning. I am in the middle. I love being in the middle. That's just who I am. I think one part of that is knowing who you are. Some people are just pure pantsers and some people are extreme planners. And I think of NaNoWriMo as an opportunity to experiment with those different creative processes. And I try to experiment every year. I try to write a novel not quite in the same way. And so I think that is important to refresh your notion of writing and to try new things, because it's only a month. So if you're a pantser, try plotting one year. If you're a plotter, try pantsing one year. It's great to kind of experience those different types of creative processes. I do think, though, that a little bit of plotting or a little bit of thinking about your novel really helps with success. I think when you're just purely pantsing, it's very easy for most people to hit a wall after a few days or a week and then quit. And if you've for instance, I'm just going to be prescriptive with my own process, but I try to make sure I have my novel idea settled by early October, and then to spend a few weeks letting it marinate and take notes and kind of write a sketch of an outline. I don't have a outline per se, but I've got a sketch. I know the trajectory of it, and I can follow that and pursue the mystery of the novel. I think the community is really important. We find that the more people are engaged with our community, the more likely they are to hit 50,000 words. And again, I think that's the accountability, that kind of friendly peer pressure. Also, the coaching and encouragement you get from the community. They say the best way to change your behavior is to announce it to the world. So if you want to quit smoking, you should post on Facebook that you want to quit smoking, because then you will be accountable to that. And the same thing goes with novel writing. And then I think the last thing is, we see a lot of people that when they hit that tough spot in their novel, usually it's that muddy middle. If they start to get behind their word count, it's easy for them to get dispirited and quit. And I would advise people, do not quit. Just like what I was saying earlier, if you can only hit 20,000 words, that's a huge achievement. Keep writing. And sometimes, as I was also saying, some people find this great blessed second wind, and they just kind of gush their way to 50,000 words. So trust that the story's there. Trust that in pursuing it and showing up for it every day, that you can find it and keep the words going.
Yeah, I agree with, I'm a pantser. I prefer discovery writer. I think discovery writer is a much better term. But
good, I love that.
Yeah, but I do think that at least understanding, like, if you're writing in a series, like I'm writing book 3 in a series, I have my characters, I have my world, it's just the plot. So that to me is something that, is easier to do. But if you're listening and you've got nothing, all you need is a character in a setting with a problem.
Right.
And that's pretty much, it's a place to start, right? The other thing I would say,
and then just punish your character. Just keep having more and more problems.
Yeah, more and more bad things. The other thing I would say is it's around 1,700 words a day, right? And I am not someone who's going to do 1,700 words a day. It's more likely I would skip 3 days, and then I might dictate maybe 5,000, 6,000 words in a couple of hours. And then it might, again, be a couple of days more, and then I might do it again. So this is the other thing. There are some people who love that regular, like you said, Toni Morrison, right at the edges of the day is a quote from her. But for me, it's more like binge writing. It's kind of do other things, and then binge and do like a couple of hours. And dictation, I would also say, I think is the superpower. If I make it this year, it's because of dictation. It's because I've really got into using dictation for first drafts. And boy, is it a good way to get word count.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up, because I do think that, NaNoWriMo, again, it's a way of finding the process that works for you. And sometimes our life does work best when we have, when you binge write on a weekend, like why not write 5,000 words on Saturday and 10,000 on Sunday, if you need to. So that's a great tip.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay, so we've talked about a few things. You have a chapter in the book, Pep Talks for Writers, which is a great book. I have it. I've had it since you put it out. I bought it. I found it in a bookstore in America, actually, and jumped on it. Yeah, it was great. If I ever meet you in person, I'll have to get you to sign it.
We'll have to meet just for that reason. I'll have you sign some of your books too.
Well, you have a chapter in the book called Embrace the Mess, and it's a really good title and chapter. So why is this such an important concept during Nano in particular?
Yeah, I think NaNoWriMo is going to be a messy month. It might be messy on the page, and it might be messy off the page too, if you make time to write that much. And I think a big part of NaNoWriMo is understanding your inner editor, which means that perfectionist side of yourself, that side of yourself that likes to edit more than draft. And when you're writing a first draft at that pace, it's likely to be pretty messy. And so we coach people to ban their inner editor, to do whatever they can to get rid of their inner editor and just let their words gush on the page. I think a novel is messy by definition of first drafts. I think that if we could look at the first drafts of our favorite authors, they would look very similar to ours, actually. And that's because no one really writes a pretty first draft. And so I think you just have to get in that mindset that you're going to revel in the mess and that you're going to experiment. I also think the wonderful things you call it, what was the word you used for pantsing?
Discovery writer.
Discovery writing. And so, the first draft, even if you're an outliner, is still discovery writing. And so I think this discovery writing means that you're going to go down a lot of different paths. Some of them might not pan out. Some of them you're going to cut, certainly in revision. But you need to have that mindset of experimentation. It's going to make the novel better. And I kind of think of it like finger painting sometimes. Like, why would you finger paint if you're going to try to stay tidy? The joy of finger painting is getting in there and making a mess with your hands in the paint. And I think the same thing applies to novels.
Yeah, I agree. And also I like the embrace the mess off the page, as in, maybe you don't need to do the house cleaning for November. Yes, have a shower, but, you can relax with some of it.
Yeah. It's important to smell good. But yeah, I think being a writer, sometimes you just people ask me all the time, how do you have time to write? Well, the reason I have time to write is that I don't pay so much attention to the dishes. It's sad sometimes, but you do have to let things go in order to honor that creative part of yourself sometimes.
Yeah. And of course, what I love about this is November. Of course, if you're listening to this at another point, you can always choose your month, but November comes around pretty quickly every year. And it's only a month. So everyone can stop doing something for a month, right? To make a bit more time.
Exactly. Your dishes will still be there. They won't
or
die.
pay your kid or something to do them.
Exactly. Yeah, there are other people. That is one key to NaNoWriMo performance, is getting other people to pick up the slack for you.
Yes, definitely. So another chapter in the book, it's called Artistic Thievery, or the Art of Remixing. And I think this is something that you come up against in NaNoWriMo. I certainly did when I was writing my first novel, which eventually became Stone of Fire. So I went, this is the first novel I've ever written. I'm feeling really nervous. I sit down and all that's filling my head is Dan Brown's Da Vinci Code. And I'm like, oh, I'm just rewriting the Da Vinci Code. What's going on here? And this is not what I want to do. I want to be in homage to Dan Brown, but I don't. And obviously, I wasn't plagiarizing, but I was coming up with things that I was like, oh, has that been done before? Has this been done before? Is this just, a thriller trope? They're hunting an ancient relic. This sounds like something that's been done before. So where is the balance between the established tropes of a genre and, I guess, being entirely original?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think it is one that every writer has to grapple with and define for him or herself. And I don't know that there's a strict definition, but I do think that I see a lot of writers hinder themselves by saying, oh, I'd like to write this story, but it's exactly like The Hunger Games or like Dan Brown. And I feel that you make it original. You're going to put your imprint on the story through your telling of the story, even if it shares a lot of characteristics with The Hunger Games, for instance. I think if you gave me an outline of Frankenstein and told me to write a novel based on that outline, I know I wouldn't write anything close to Frankenstein. It would somehow be distinctly my own version, and it might not even resemble Frankenstein. And so I think we're always creating in this cauldron of influences, and we shouldn't worry too much about it. As you said, if you're not plagiarizing, then you're writing something, a new story. And I think sometimes we give too much value to originality, because there's an old saying, like Joseph Campbell wrote his whole book, The Hero's Journey, about this, that there's he defined that there was one story essentially, and that every story is kind of the same story. A hero leaves his or her home, encounters other worlds, faces down opposing forces, and then returns with a power or something to bestow to his people, the people who he left behind. And that goes for stories like Buddha or Moses or Harry Potter or Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz. So I guess I just think that people shouldn't get hung up on originality. They should trust that by writing it, they will make it their own. And that's all. And if you have some inclination to plagiarize, it will hopefully come out when your editor looks at it.
Yes, and we should just be clear, if people don't understand, plagiarism is copying and pasting actual text from other people's work. It is, it's not, the definition is not taking someone else's idea, but if I did write, a story that exactly followed Dan Brown's Da Vinci Code, then, that would be crossing a line. But I agree. Most people build on what's been done before, and I'm on book 11 of my Arcane series, which I started that first NaNoWriMo. So, I've managed to make my own thriller series out of that feeling. So I wanted to acknowledge that feeling, because a lot of people have it. So I wanted to ask you, what are some of because obviously I'm an example of someone who did that first NaNoWriMo and has gone on I've written like 17 novels at this point, 10 years later, and a whole load of nonfiction as well. But what are some of the other sort of results of doing NaNoWriMo that you've seen?
Gosh, we've had so many people publish novels and so many bestsellers, and we have no true way of counting them. It's all self-reported, or we'll read about, somebody mentioning NaNoWriMo in an interview. And so, there's Marissa Meyer, who wrote Cinder and all of her novels. She writes all of her novels either during November, or if her publishing schedule doesn't allow that, she'll write the first draft in 30 days. She keeps to that technique. So does Hugh Howey. With his he wrote Wool during NaNoWriMo in 2009, a fascinating story. He credits NaNoWriMo with making him a writer. Erin Morgenstern's coming out with her second novel. She wrote Night Circus during NaNoWriMo.
No way. No, I love that.
Yeah. Oh, you didn't know that?
No.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And I haven't read her new book yet, but I hear it's just as fantastic. Gosh, there's just so many. Rainbow Rowell wrote Fangirl during NaNoWriMo. Elizabeth Acevedo, who won the National Book Award for The Poet X, she wrote her second novel during NaNoWriMo 2013, and that just came out 6 years later. So yeah, there are just so many stories. I can talk all day about NaNoWriMo success stories. So I think, per what you were saying, that there's a whole. There is and also in self-publishing, especially like people who are, writing a lot each month and publishing a lot each year. NaNoWriMo is part of that revolution of writing where people are doing it differently than they used to. I mean, the whole serialization of publication has come back since the 1900s, I think, or anyway, it was very trendy in the 1900s and it came back recently, and a lot of people are doing that. And I think NaNoWriMo contributes to that trend as well.
Yes, absolutely. So let's talk about the inevitable criticism. Many in the traditional industry consider NaNoWriMo to be churning out unreadable books. They can't even call them novels or books. Yeah. They call them, things. But certainly the word churning is used, unreadable is used. So what do you say to any people who are feeling like, that quality issue? But also, what do people do after November to make it better?
Yeah, I would say first, we've never made the claim that you're writing 50,000 words in 1 month leads to a publishable book right away. We've heard these stories that I think are actually exaggerated, that editors receive like loads and loads of manuscripts from NaNoWriMo writers on December 1. And I don't think that's true, because I've actually never talked to a NaNoWriMo writer who has submitted their novel so early. And we always advise people to revise their novels. We think the revision is very, very important. And we have a whole program built around it. In January and February, we have a program called I Wrote a Novel, Now What? And we try to guide people through those next steps of revision and editing and publishing choices too. There's so many publishing choices. There's so much to learn about how to publish your book. And so I don't think of it as churning. I think of NaNoWriMo as the first draft, the exploratory draft, the discovery draft. And then there's so much more discovery to be done during revision. And I do know that, like I was mentioning, the trend, the serialization trend, that obviously exists. I don't think those books are unreadable. Many of them are being purchased and read. And so I think there are a lot of different styles of reading and writing, and the world needs to not look at them with a snobby lens. They are fulfilling people on some level, both on the writing and the reading end. So yeah, I guess I just disagree that NaNoWriMo is producing bad books.
Yes, and I'm sorry. I'm sorry you always have to answer that question. I know it must come up a lot.
I like answering it, to tell you the truth, because I think it's a big misunderstanding. And I think it's because, we say that, allow yourself to write a crappy rough draft. And we're not emphasizing the crappiness of writing. We don't want people to be crappy writers. We just want them to be able to accept that the rough draft is crappy by definition, and they shouldn't get hung up on it. They've got to go through that crappy rough draft to get to the more beautiful second or third draft.
Yeah, I agree. Now, I didn't prep you for this question, so I'm going to go for it anyway. But what I have I'm obsessed with AI at the moment. And I have heard of NaNoWriMo, which is essentially in November, software programmers are trying to write a program that will generate a novel of 50,000 words in a month. And this year we've had the release of GPT-2, which is a text, a narrative generator, which is really interesting. So I wondered if you did have any thoughts on NaNoWriMo, or the AI GPT-2 stuff.
This is an entirely original question. I've never been asked this before. So it's super fun, especially because I don't know a whole lot about AI, but I have read about this. I think it's fascinating. I'm like, why not? Let's see where we can go with this. I have my doubts, I guess. I think there's just such an emotional component that goes into writing a novel, and what we were saying earlier, that you're seeing the world through somebody else's eyes. I don't know if we're there with AI or not, but I don't know that much about it. So I'm sure people in AI could offer me great counter arguments. I just think it's another exciting part of the way the world of writing is going.
Yeah, exactly. And I would say, if people listening, they're like, what is that? What are you talking about? I think that it can be used as good writing prompts. So if your brain is completely empty, plug in your last sentence into a tool like talk2transformer.com, which is based on the GPT-2 algorithms. It will generate some stuff for you, and that might actually help you get over that hump. So yeah. I think that's a really interesting way that it might be used as a creative creative tool. And that's how I think of AI. We're using tools all the time. You and I are talking across Skype on computers, on the internet. Right. So we use tools. So that's how I think.
I think so too. I think, like just this morning during my writing session, it's really interesting how often I will Google something in a 2-hour block of writing. And part of it has that sort of prompt nature, even if I'm not using those Google searches as a prompt. And some of it is just information for my novel. And so it's interesting to me how my writing style and technology, how they have blended together in a lot of very good ways in general, I think. And so I think like all of these tools at our fingertips, instead of, they're worth looking at with scrutiny, of course, but it's also worth looking at them in terms of how they can enhance our writing and our human experience.
Definitely. And I'll be keeping an eye out on NaNoWriMo. I think this year might be the year. I know that in the past, no one has managed this, but this could be the year when it happens because of this expansion of GPT-2. So very interesting times. Now, I want to ask you just one more question. We're almost out of time. But
can we talk about self-driving cars and writing a novel in a self-driving car? This could be revolutionize novel writing because that'll solve some of the time management issues, especially for
I agree with you. I do think the writing is going to take off hugely, even more than it has done.
Everybody's going to be a writer.
Yeah, but I do want to ask you about this book you've recently co-written. It's called Brave the Page, A Young Writer's Guide to Telling Epic Stories. And I am very happily child-free. But I have nieces. I actually have all nieces, lots and lots of nieces, no nephews. And one of the most common questions I get asked is, how do we encourage young people to write? Especially, what often happened to me is they love stories and then their English literature teacher says, you can't write that. Like I remember the day my love of story got squashed was I wrote about a very dark nightmare. Like I told a story that was very dark and they just said, this just isn't appropriate. Write something else. And clearly I was just a horror loving teenager. But so if a teacher or a parent or, how do we encourage young people, basically?
I think you basically just told the story. I think we have taught writing in a way that inhibits a lot of kids from taking joy or finding meaning in their writing. And I think one thing about our NaNoWriMo, our Young Writers program, the reason I always say it's successful is that we allow writing to be fun and meaningful. And part of that is just giving kids a choice about what they want to write. So in your case, we would have celebrated you for writing that dark horror story. That would have been wonderful, and that would have being celebrated like that and getting, people telling you that it was relevant and meaningful and fun and interesting, all those kinds of things. That makes you want to do it more. And I think the reason that we have a big impact on kids writing is because they learn. The best way to learn anything is through your passions, right? To take joy in it. And so these kids get to write a novel, which is a huge thing, and they get to find a lot of meaning and have fun doing it and have fun doing it with other people in the classroom. Excuse me. And that makes them more interested in language. It even makes them more interested in grammar and punctuation and some of the more boring sides of writing, I guess. Excuse me, just have a little cough. So yeah, I think that is everything. It's flipping your experience, essentially. That's what we do. We take everything that you described as a negative and we try to focus on those positive aspects. And I think that's the way to get kids to write. And writing is more important than ever because our world is created through our writing, whether it's on social media or email.
Yeah. And also just coming back on the AI and technology front, I don't think we can even imagine what, let's say a 9-year-old right now in 2019, we don't know what that 9-year-old is going to do for a job because we can't even imagine what that 10 years, 20-year future is going to be. But what we do know is that creativity and being able to self-direct your time and, direct things like AIs or robots or whatever, that's always going to be useful. Whereas learning some other things, the rule-based stuff might not be so useful. So I agree with you. I think this is so important. So if people do have how do people find the Young Writers program in particular?
Yeah, it's you can find a little logo on our main website, or you can go to ywp.nanowrimo.org or just search for the Young Writers program. And I entirely agree with you. I think there are also lessons beyond the writing lessons of writing a novel. When you write a novel, kids, they learn grit and they learn determination and they learn how to achieve big things. And we hear that they apply that to other aspects of their schooling. So it has importance beyond the novel itself.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, so where can people find you and your books and also NaNoWriMo online?
I feel like just Google NaNoWriMo, Google me, Google NaNoWriMo books. They're in Amazon and they're in all the usual places. So if you Google any of those things, it'll be one of the top results, or the top result, actually.
Brilliant. Well, thanks so much for your time, Grant. That was great.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Joanna.
So I hope you found the interview with Grant useful today. Whether you're writing a novel in November or any time, you can start anytime. And now is, in fact, the best time to start. So seriously, writing my first novel changed my life. And once you get the bug, you can't stop. So certainly consider Grant's tips, consider NaNoWriMo, whatever point you are in your journey. Coming up this week, I have a little in-betweeny-sode extra. And then next week, I'm talking to Michael Anderle about his journey from indie author to essentially running a massive creative empire with 600 plus books, many authors in only a couple of years. And of course, those of you who know the 20 books to 50K ethos, and many of you, I'm sure, in that group or have heard of that group, that Facebook group, and Michael started that basically with Craig Martell. That group has been focused on writing fast and using Kindle Unlimited, KU, which has been very different to my own model of publishing and marketing and my global, wide approach. So I haven't been very involved in the 20 books to 50K because it's just not the way I do things. But it was very interesting when I found out that Michael is actually going wide. I mean, I said earlier this year, Michael went wide with audio earlier on this year. And now Michael is going wide with his next whole series. I wanted to have a chat with him because this is a big shift in perspective, and also his company has grown and they're doing interesting things with shared worlds. And we talk about IP, talk about intellectual property, because when you have a company that is that big, contracts and IP are really important things. So that is coming next week. To be honest, we still disagree about a lot of things, but in a very friendly way. I can only disagree in a friendly way. That's just the way I am. But I think you'll find it an interesting discussion between two people with quite different perspectives. So stick around next week and you can hear that. Happy writing. I'll see you next time. Thanks for listening today. I hope you found it helpful. You might also like the backlist episodes and show notes available at thecreativepenn.com/podcast. You can also get your free author blueprint at thecreativepenn.com/blueprint. If you'd like to connect, you can tweet me at The Creative Penn or find me on Facebook at The Creative Penn. See you next time.